I have been recently telling myself to finally make an account to submit my stories. I wasn't going to do it until the light in my daughter's room turned off a few nights ago. While this was happening, I would post in a Facebook group, update every 6 months to a year as a way to get out what's going on. Typing it up and reading it out loud helped me make and realize this crap was happening and how crazy it sounded. I'm going to copy and paste all that over here and wind it all up in the end to what's going on now, possibly new revelations that I've had. This all began back in December of 2014 and ended around December of 2018. I'll include as much detail as I can, and remember, and will also change the names of people since events and stories like this are often met with doubt or ridicule. In 2014, my pregnant wife, our son, my wife's niece, whom we gained temporary custody of for a year so she could finish high school. Her son and I all moved to an area close to where I grew up in Central Texas. It was a growing suburb with good schools and a good community that was located close to where I was working. To the east is a large safe city, and to every other direction is ranching land, hill country, and old creeks. We found a house to rent in a subdivision that started being built in the late 1990s and finished around 2010 that has a nice creek running through it. It was once a Texas Ranger fort before the Civil War. There were many kind of skirmishes that occurred in this area between the Rangers and the natives. Some of them are pretty well known if you know the history of the area. There are a few locations miles away where the natives massacred settlers traveling between towns in the early to mid 1800s. Also, there is a location not too far from here where they found the remains of a 14,000 or so year old Neanderthal, which at the time was one of the oldest ever found in this region. I guess I'm saying this area is old and has some history. Anyway, after the Civil War started, the Texas Rangers abandoned the fort, and it was almost immediately set on fire by the natives. We rented this house during the summer. There was nothing special about it. It was one of possibly 10 home models were built in that section of the subdivision. Every house had 2 trees in the front yard, a 2-car driveway, and around 20 feet of HOA-approved grass between each house. We lived so close to the elementary school that we could hear the bell for school every day. One afternoon, I wanted to show everyone the areas I remembered growing up. We drove by the house I grew up in, my old high school, and a few other areas that I remembered running around and causing the same minor trouble you did growing up in what was once a small town of 2,000. We passed the old burnt-down house that was said to be haunted by the meth heads that everybody talked about, but nobody ever saw. The woods that was said to have a giant shadow dog running around at night. And finally, the cemetery that the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre opening scene was shot at. Our niece was fascinated with the cemetery because even though the area was built up, you could tell it was most likely filmed there. Since she liked it so much, I thought I'd give her a scare by driving everyone by the old cemetery on the other side of town. It was a private cemetery that was located off one of the FM roads and said to have some of the settlers that were killed by the natives there. This place probably hadn't heard or had any new arrivals in about 70 years. It was getting dark by the time we got there, so I decided to pull off the road to try and shine my headlights on it so everybody could see. As soon as I did, I felt off, like I shouldn't have been there. The area was in the middle of a drought, and because of that, all the ground had massive cracks in it. Some of the markers and headstones had even fallen over, and the ones that were still standing were leaning over pretty bad. The picket fence surrounding the markers was barely standing and discolored, and even though no one did maintenance on the grounds, it looked like the grass wasn't wild. Instead, it was oddly bare compared to the surrounding area, with only a few tufts of tall weeds scattered about. Just then, the sun set behind the cedar and oak trees that covered the horizon. "That looks creepy," my wife said jokingly. "Yeah, with the way the headlights hit those rocks over there, it looks like dolls sitting on the ground," I said, trying to scare our niece. Only when I looked harder, there were old dolls sitting upright in the middle of the cemetery. Old, sun-bleached dolls. They could have been there for days or a few months. It had been so hot and dry in that area for so long, you couldn't tell. Everyone in the car got quiet, just staring and trying to figure out if we should laugh or be freaked out. The wind blew a little and something caught my eye. There was a lone dead tree off in the distance. This tree was an old post oak, about 40 feet tall, completely bare of leaves. Originally, what I thought were branches, small branches, were actually what I looked like chicken bones hanging, a lot of them. And yes, they were dolls hanging too. "Alright, who wants to get some snow cones?" I said as cheerfully as I could, in an attempt to disrupt everyone's gaze before they saw what I did. The mood quickly changed as our niece and her son all hollered, "Me!" And just like that, everyone put our previous stop in the back of their minds as they went through all the different flavors they wanted on their snow cones. About a week later, our son, who was about 6 at the time, started telling us that he was seeing shadows in the halls and eyes looking down at him from the AC vents in the house. Our niece started complaining of the shadows in the house and feeling like she was being watched, while her son, who was 2, would walk, point to walls and start jabbering to them, then would suddenly get upset and start crying. My wife and I never saw, felt, or experienced anything and didn't really think much about it, other than that it was a new house for us, and the kids did like to watch scary movies. One night, I had to go drive past an old cemetery for one reason or another. While passing it, I thought I saw a deer out of the corner of my eye. I immediately slowed down, except it wasn't a deer. It was some kind of large shadow that moved across the tree line and smoothly into the cemetery, and then vanished. This is where it all began for me. On the way home, I felt like I was being followed. I kept looking in all my mirrors, taking side streets, going through subdivisions, going through parking lots, but there were no cars following me. I jumped on the toll road and floored it, turned around, got back on it, and went home. When I got home, the kids were watching a movie, and my wife was in the kitchen, making herself a hot Cheeto sour pickle covered in Kool-Aid with lime juice and a warhead in the middle. Yeah, I don't get it either, but she was about 4 months pregnant at the time, and finally starting to show. I rubbed her belly and gave her a kiss, and told her I was going to lie down for a few minutes. It was dark, but still only about 8:45, 3 to 4 hours before everybody went to bed on a weekend. At the time, we had a headboard that had curved decorative steel bars spaced about 18 inches apart, so you could see and touch the wall, and if you reached far enough, you could feel the carpet on the floor. I was lying down on my stomach, trying to clear my mind, and had just closed my eyes when I had this feeling of dread. After about 10 seconds of this, I finally opened my eyes, expecting to see the wall. What I saw instead, I will never forget. It was a face grinning back at me from less than 6 inches away. It had red and black skin, no hair, black eyes, and bright yellow teeth. Imagine a mix between Darth Maul from Star Wars and the demon from Insidious. My brain said, "Stay calm, don't show fear." But out of my mouth came a flurry of profanity. My mind started screaming, "Get out of here!" But with every ounce of self-restraint I could even possibly muster up, I rolled out of bed, turned my back to this thing I just saw, and walked away down the hall and back into the living room. "I thought you were going to lay down for a while," my wife said with a sour look on her face as she took a bite from her sour science experiment that was on her plate. "Yeah, I think I'm going to lay down in here instead. I thought I saw something." I replied calmly, trying not to freak out my family. I don't know how I did it. I've been in combat situations in different scenarios in my life where the lives of people around me were on the line, and I don't think I felt more physical and emotional fear than I did in those 10 seconds. Not only did I see what at times felt like a pure incarnation of evil, but it was in my house, where my pregnant wife slept, where my son played, where my niece's son liked to hide. This thing was in my house, and it was playing games with us. Over the next week or so, things got worse. I was having nightmares and hearing footsteps in the house. My son was having night terrors. Our niece couldn't fall asleep, and her son was always crying. I was new to my section and had recently changed jobs when I re-enlisted, so it was a new situation for me. I worked along many civilian contractors. Most of them were retired sergeant majors. A few of them were lower enlisted guys that just happened to be at the right place at the right time for a job opening up when their contract was up. Mrs. Z was somewhere in between. She was the only contractor I had spoke to regularly. So when I came into work one Monday, looking like something was wrong, she asked me if everything was okay. I was trying to test how she would respond. My son is saying that he's seeing shadows in the house and it's keeping him up at night. And last night was a rough night, I said. Really? Is your house haunted? She said totally seriously. Boom, question answered. I looked around. Well, I proceeded to tell her everything that had happened. She explained to me that her family were strong Catholics and from Brazil. Her mother was able to sense things, could see auras, and would end up giving me some tips that might be helpful. Well, nothing helped. Then finally, she said her family was going to go to South Texas to see some friends this coming weekend, and while they were there, they were going to stop by this miracle church to pick up some holy water and would pick some up for me as well. The next Monday could not come fast enough. At work, she handed me the holy water. I looked at it. Was in an old water bottle. Odd. But who am I to say what type of container such a gift should be held in? She told me what to do. Put it in a spray bottle. Spray every corner of every room of the house, every closet, pantry, bathroom, up high and down low. Spray above every door and every window, every AC vent. Do this all while saying this Bible verse. Start in the front rooms of the house. Leave the back door open and slowly work your way to the back door so anything in there is forced to leave the house. She handed me a slip of paper. I looked at it, and it read, Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. Take hold of their shield and buckler, and stand up for mine help. Draw out also the spear, and stop the way against them that persecute me. Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. Let them be confounded, and put to shame that seek after my soul. Let them be turned back, and brought to confusion that devise my hurt. Let them be as chaff before the wind, and let the angel of the Lord persecute them. For without cause they have hid for me their net in a pit, which without cause they have digged for my soul. Let destruction come upon him at unawareness, and let his net that he hath hid catch himself into that very destruction, let him fall. And my soul shall be joyful in the Lord, it shall rejoice in his salvation. After you are finished, keep it in your wallet for as long as you can, so it'll always be with you, she said with a smile. As soon as I got home, I did exactly as she said, twice. That evening, there was a noticeable change in the house. Everybody was laughing and having a good time in a way we haven't in months. When it was time for bed, no one had any complaints and all the kids went to bed without problems, including myself. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to talk, unable to move. I was completely paralyzed. I don't know if it was from fear or sleep paralysis. Something was in the room. I could sense it. I could feel its hate towards me, feeling ice cold like death while burning up from pure disgust. It was watching me. It was angry. You know how I said seeing that demon thing was the most frightened I'd ever been? Nah. This is it. I could feel my death. I could feel the hatred this thing had for me. I was fighting to move, fighting to tilt my head, even a bit, so I could at least look at what was going to end my life. Then suddenly I remembered. My pregnant wife and the little baby girl that was growing in her belly were laying right next to me. I stopped fighting it. What if it moved and woke her up? What if her being asleep is the only thing that is keeping her from experiencing the fear that I am feeling? What if her sleeping happily right next to me is what is keeping her safe? What if I wake her up and it kills all three of us? I accepted my fate. If me dying silently in the night means she is safe, fine. So I closed my eyes. I relaxed and started praying. God, Please protect my wife and children. Please let me fall back asleep. Please keep them safe. If I die tonight, please let me die in my sleep. I must have said it 1,000 times in my head. I wake up to my alarm going off. I made it. I'm alive. I lean over to look at my wife, and suddenly her eyes pop open. I gotta pee. And she hobbles quickly to the bathroom. I get ready for work, and that was the last I ever saw of the demon creature. But it isn't the end. Over the next 3 years, my beautiful daughter was born. My wife started working again. I got a promotion. Everything was going amazing. Then I developed heart problems. I was diagnosed with Brugada syndrome, which is very serious. The doctor said that I could basically drop dead at any moment, and it's amazing you haven't already. Thanks, Doc. A month later, I had a defibrillator implanted in my chest, and 8 months later, I was medically discharged from the military. I was only 27. Our niece and her son had moved out. Then, in June of 2017, my sister passed away from a seizure suddenly. She had some serious medical problems but was working through them, and for the first time in years, had a positive outlook on life, making plans for the future, and was back to being the beautiful person she had always been. It hit the family hard. One night, in August of 2017, I was unable to sleep. My new job had me working nights, so on my days off, I'd go to sleep around 3 in the morning. My wife was already in bed. I went to lay down but kept hearing noises, creaks, chirps, and what sounded like footsteps. You know, the kind of stuff that you write off as the house settling, the wind blowing outside, or the AC kicking on or off. I kept my eyes closed, mainly not to alarm myself, and try to force myself to fall asleep. Then, I got this feeling that something was in my room. It wasn't like the feeling I had previously. I was just uncomfortable, like something was off. I opened my eyes, and as soon as I did, a shadow bolted around the corner in the room. I thought it was my wife. Babe, you okay? My daughter moved around in her crib a little, and I looked over to her, only to see my wife asleep next to me. This happened a few more times, but things were starting up again slowly. It started with my oldest son sleepwalking. He had never done it before. We would wake up with him staring at a wall in our bedroom. It completely frightened my wife with the first time. I'm not gonna lie, I thought he was possessed or something the first time. He was just standing there in the corner of the room, breathing hard, and would quietly say, ha, ha, ha. Really creepy. But after the 3rd or 4th time we found him doing that, or found him walking around the house, we would just gently guide him back to his room, and everything would be okay. He never remembered it in the morning. Then, about 3 months later, the sleepwalking stopped. I kept hearing the footsteps though. Light bulbs would go out faster than usual. Different rooms of the house would always be extreme temperatures. One room would be uncomfortably warm, while another room, that was along the same exterior wall, would be really cold. The insulation in the attic seemed to be the same. There were no outside factors like a tree blocking one room and not the other, and the AC vents were never clogged or bent. My wife would mention all of these things to me, but she never really wanted to discuss anything that was going on. It freaked her out, but she didn't want anybody to know how badly. Whenever I would want to talk to her about it, she would just nod her head and agree with any solution I thought would fix it or explain it. She did ask to place crosses above the exterior doors in each room, and that's about it. One night, my wife took the kids to one of her friend's house about a half an hour away, which left me alone. This doesn't happen at all often, especially at night. I'm used to kids running around, babies crying, dog running into things and barking at the squirrels that constantly pester him outside the window. So, I used this opportunity, as any parent could I guess, to sleep. I like to sleep in their living room on the couch. Something about my back being to a wall in the center of the house. My wife doesn't understand it, but this is my time. She isn't here to pester me, to try to convince me to sleep in the empty bed while she is away. So I turn on Netflix, put on a Planet Earth documentary, and slowly drift asleep to the narrator's calm voice and whale mating calls, or something like that. I'm suddenly awakened by a loud scream. I look towards the TV. Netflix is already in its "Are you still there?" mode. I look at the clock. It's a little after 3. Did I scream in my sleep and wake myself up? I jump up, and if it wasn't me, that means there's somebody outside my house again. I forgot to mention, we have had problems recently with high school kids throwing parties like they do, getting busted by the cops, and running away through people's backyards trying to get away. Annoying, but nothing too major. We've all been there before. Just be prepared to get yelled at if anyone catches you. There was also a break in one of the other side of the neighborhood a few weeks prior to the events that are unrelated. I jump up to get my gun that I have hidden away in a drop-down shelf behind the couch, a recent purchase that I was quite happy with. I run to the door, look through the peephole, see nobody is there, so I open the door. I walk around the outside of the house as quietly as possible. I don't want to startle my neighbors that already don't like me too much because of my new work hours. The wind blows, and my dogs go absolutely crazy in the house. I take off, adrenaline pumping like crazy. I thought for sure somebody was inside the house. The door had closed slightly, so I shouldered it. It flung open. Nothing. I was fully expecting somebody to be in my house. Instead, I see my dog slowly raise his head and look at me like I disturbed his sleep, then turn his head and go back to sleep. I checked every room in the house, under and every bed, moved all the clothes hanging in every closet, everything. The house was empty, and I was unable to fall back asleep until my family got back the next morning. Everything got quiet again after that. My wife had our youngest son in June of 2018. In September of 2018, I began going through confirmation classes through the Catholic Church, and this is when things started happening again. The footsteps, shadows, all of it. I would hear scratching on the exterior door about 4 times a week. Whenever I got out to look out the peephole, there would be nobody there. My father-in-law had a job up near where we lived, and instead of staying in a hotel, he would pay us what his company gave him for a hotel if he could stay with us. We thought that was a good idea. He quickly began to see things, shadows. He said he is seeing shadows pass by his door, what looks like a person walking past the bathroom door when he is shaving. He started hearing footsteps walking down the hall to the room that he was staying in. He jokingly asked me about it, and I gave him a brief rundown of what had happened over the past few years, without getting into too much detail. He said he believed me, and that he never felt anger, just annoyance from whatever it was. One night while I was working, my oldest son had his friend over. I get a call at around 11 p.m. from him crying his eyes out, and barely understandable. My wife grabs the phone. "Hey, did you get that?" "What? No, what happened? Is he okay?" "He said he saw your sister in the hallway." I started to tear up. My oldest son and my sister were very close. She worked in a comic book store which hosted different card game tournaments, and even got opening night tickets to many of the new Marvel and DC movies that were coming out. What more could a boy want in an aunt? "My sister? What do you mean?" She handed the phone back to him. "Dad, I saw her. She was just standing there." A wave of emotion came over me, followed by a wave of questions. What did she look like? Was she happy? Sad? Did she move at all? How did you feel when you saw her? These were all the questions I could think of. What I would tell my family to do next depended solely on the answers to these questions. "She looked happy." His 10-year-old voice broke a little. "She smiled and waved at me. I felt happy when I saw her," he finally said. "Well, good. She wanted to just let you know that she was doing okay, and she missed you," I said, trying to calm him down. If it was anything else, I would have not come home, and we would have stayed in a hotel for the night. It's been about 8 months since that happened. Since then, nothing creepy has happened in my house. Absolutely everything stopped, and I'm thoroughly convinced that my sister made everything leave, and that was her way of letting everyone know my family was safe. I told one person about my story. They wanted to know more about the first time I felt the demon in my room and that I felt I was going to die. They tried to relate it to my heart problems. A symptom of Brugada syndrome is a racing heart, like 300 BPM or beats per minute, which causes blood to not flow properly to my brain, which leads to blacking out. Without immediate medical treatment, the person will die within minutes. They said that the experience could be the result of being awoken because my heart was literally about to beat out of my chest, and everything else was my brain just trying to understand what was happening. I don't know. I'm not ruling it out, but the doctor said that if my heart begins to show the symptoms, there is literally a 0% chance of pulling out of it without getting resuscitated. The scream I heard when I was alone may have been somebody outside, and when I went to check, they may have tried to come inside, only to be met by my intimidating 40-pound Brittany Spaniel. Not very likely, since I would have probably seen them run away from the house, and my dog is lazy, but not lazy enough to fall back asleep immediately after barking at a potential intruder. Those are all the explanations that I can come up with. We move out of the house in a few months to a new construction on a few acres out in the country. Hopefully nothing follows us, or nothing is already there. Angry people are disturbing their final resting place. My sister has already saved my family once. I don't want her to have to do it again. And now here I am, in a newly built house at 1 a.m. It's June 2020, and 3 days ago the lights on my daughter's room turned off. I was in the room next to mine, now almost 5-year-old daughter. My wife is in the kitchen. My youngest son was asleep, and my oldest was playing Xbox in the playroom. I say this because there's no way somebody could have turned the lights off without me seeing them. I even heard the click of the switch. My daughter has been terrified of her room since we moved in. We thought it was because of her room as being far away from us and big, but now that all this is happening again, I'm starting to question things. It made me sit down and think about all the times I thought I felt things touch my arms or legs and just blew it off, thinking it was a muscle spasm or twitch of the skin. Sometimes I see shadows out of the corner of my eye. That got me thinking about the first time I thought I saw a ghost and how I felt there was an evil in my childhood house. The times I almost died. The times I should have died. Recently, my oldest son told me a story about walking around in the storm drains of the old neighborhood, which led me to conclude what him and his friends saw was a skinwalker. I'll post those stories if this one goes well. Possibly a few